Sir Bill, thank you very much for being with us on BBC News this morning.
Very, very nice to speak to you this afternoon.
Thank you. Let me ask you, first of all, when Joe Johnson says that he worries that we will end up having less control if the Prime Minister, if a deal is done with the European Union on the terms that are suggested at the moment, than we have at the moment as members of the European Union, what's your view on that?
Well, it's very simple. In fact, I've put out a pamphlet on the European Foundation website last night, which sets all this out. The reality is that, and I'm chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee, and I've been on that committee for 33 years. I know how the European Union functions in the making of laws. And with the Prime Minister, what was it, a week last Monday, I raised with her this very question. I said, what you've said in Lancaster House is that we do not truly leave the European Union unless we gain control of our laws. And I said, you cannot possibly claim that this Chequers deal, in fact, gives us back control of these laws. So I understand entirely what Joe Johnson means. And in fact, if I may say so, I think he's largely been looking at the kind of things that people like me have been saying and writing about this.
But I suppose he's reached a different conclusion, hasn't he? In other words, his conclusion is that don't be out, stay in, because it may not be an ideal option, but it's the least worst option in his view.
You're so right. And actually, that is his dilemma. And that's what I point out in this pamphlet, because the reality is that by staying in the European Union, whether it's by way of a referendum or literally by staying in and not going through the current arrangements, what we will be doing will be surrendering ourselves to the problem which exists already, which is in the European Council of Ministers, where the laws are made, those decisions are made on a system which is not only undemocratic, but is deliberately so.
Well, we've lived with it for 40 years, and we've made it work. Well, in those circumstances, is that better? Is he? Sorry, just very quickly, just put the question: is that better? However unattractive it is, does it not apply to the Churchill dictum, which is, democracy is a terrible way of doing it, but it's the least terrible way of doing things?
No, this is not democracy. That's the point I'm making. The decisions are taken behind closed doors, as I point out in this pamphlet, without a transcript. Nobody knows what's going on in the meetings. It's either done by majority vote, and normally it isn't. It's done by consensus, because they know what the decisions are going to be before they go in the room. And the thing to take on board is the fact that this goes right across the board of all legislation made by the European Union. And some of it is actually made and delegated to the people, the diplomats round the table who decide these matters in a thing called the Committee of Permanent Representatives. So for practical purposes, we are being governed and the laws are being imposed upon us under the existing system, which if we were to remain in the European Union would still apply to us. The problem with the Chequers arrangement, as Joe Johnson rightly points out, and I've been saying for years and years, is the fact that under these arrangements, and particularly since Chequers with the Common Rule Book, on which he bounced the cabinet, they didn't have proper consultation. In fact, they had none. And the reality is that those decisions at Chequers are themselves completely unacceptable for all those reasons too, because we'd be locked into decisions taken by the other 27.
Given what you've said about bouncing the cabinet into the Chequers agreement, given what Joe Johnson has said about this being the worst display of statecraft by a British government since the Suez crisis, why on earth is Theresa May still leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister?
Well, I have to say that I've made my position absolutely clear. I mean, when I said to her only about 10 days ago, how can you possibly claim that we will be in control of our laws under these arrangements? And what she effectively said to me was, well, if you look at the answer in Hansard, we do have Hansard. In the European Union, you can't find out what people said, but that's another story. The reality is that she said, oh, well, British manufacturing said they wanted this. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we're up against, and it's not an answer to the real question which the British people voted for in the biggest historic vote of all time, and when they said they wanted to leave the European Union. And frankly, a lot of the other matters about trade deals and about the backstop and about Northern Ireland, about all the other economic questions are subsidiary, but very, very important to the fundamental question, do you control your laws? Because if you get control of your laws, then you can comply with the wishes of the general election electorate, and you can comply with the referendum itself. That is what that vote was all about. And it's about democratic self-government. And if I may say so, looking at tomorrow, Remembrance Day and the Armistice commemorations, that's what people fought and died for. That is a really big question. That's why it's so important. That's why we have to get control of our laws.
Sir Bill Cash, MP, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much.
You too.